he's scheduled to testify on Thursday, and there is a question as to whether or not you will invoke executive privilege or if you will allow him to testify.
The President's power to exert executive privilege is very well established. However, in order to facilitate a swift and thorough examination of the facts sought by the Senate's Intelligence Committee, President Trump will not assert executive privilege regarding James Comey's scheduled testimony.
Well, the White House saying it's going to happen. Jim Comey will testify in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee on Thursday. Two of the members on that committee weighed in on this whole investigation over the weekend.
There is a lot of smoke. We have no smoking gun at this point, but there is a lot of smoke.
I think the president is better served by getting all this information out sooner rather than later. Let's find out what happened and bring this to a conclusion.
So we'll start there with our panel. Let's bring them in. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Tom Rogan, staff writer for The Washington Examiner. Bloomberg News White House reporter Jennifer Jacobs, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Molly, it's happening. You know, it's like, finally, it's, you know.
Yeah, it's finally happening, although I think people are anxious to have Comey actually answer questions. He's got a good track record of answering questions obliquely in a way that's favorable to him, declining to answer questions that might actually shed light on exactly what's going on at the FBI. So I think that it'll be important for both the Republicans and the Democrats to ask really good questions. The Senate Intelligence Committee had just asked him a series of questions about his practice of writing memos, who had access to them, who he's transmitted information about those memos to, and he declined to answer that. That's kind of par for the course. Hoping on Thursday we actually get some good answers with Comey.
Jennifer, sometimes, if you heard Brit Hume earlier, these big moments in Washington never really live up to everything everybody thought they were going to be. And here you have this questioning, and you wonder how much Jim Comey can answer about an ongoing investigation, how much he will talk about what he said to President Trump or didn't say.
It could be a turning point in his presidency. I know the White House is preparing for this. They're also trying to prepare for other things. Part of the reason why Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon flew back early from the foreign trip was to get their house in order to work on their domestic agenda. And they have made this week Infrastructure Week. Next week, they told us, is going to be Workforce Development Week. So they're trying to stay on message. They're trying to keep reporters feeding us talking points about how they're rebuilding and retraining America. So they're doing their best to kind of keep us focused on the topics that they would like to be talking about, but meanwhile they're preparing.
Yeah, that's the shiny thing Thursday.
Yeah, look, I think the interesting thing here is that if you look at James Comey, the man, his professional career, up until Russia, of course, was quite quiet, understated, behind the scenes. Since he has left, also, that he has been behind the scenes. He has not craved publicity. So I suspect that will be right, as you suggest, that this might not be as exciting as some people are gearing up for it to be, both on that point of the man's personal character, but also because of the context of an ongoing investigation.
There will have to be some answers, whether what he said, didn't say. I mean, all of this leakage about the memos and what he's going to say, there will have to be some substance.
Well, there will be, but he has a history of and a talent for navigating what he says, his remarks, his status, or his own history in a way that minimizes its impact. You can interpret everything he did last year as a way for a director of the FBI caught in a unique situation, a candidate who's under investigation, a campaign under investigation, a unique situation that put him out in the spotlight as a way to avoid determining the election. I think he failed, but I think that was his motive. Here, there's one question. Did the president obstruct justice? That's what everybody is waiting for. I don't think there's anything of great interest other than that. And his answer, I think, is going to be obvious. He will navigate to a point where he says, well, you know, there might have been some pressure, but it's not obstruction. Why? Because if it were obstruction, then he is indicting himself.
Because he had to bring it forward.
For not making a statement, for not bringing it out in the open. So he can't say it's obstruction, which is what everybody who wants to see Trump destroyed is waiting to hear. So what we will hear is something navigating in between and saying, well, it wasn't really pressure. He was speaking on behalf of an associate, a friend. It could be interpreted various ways. That's what I think is going to happen, and that's why I think it's going to be a bust.
But tune in anyway. We will have full coverage all morning. It's such a great promo. Thank you, Charles. I want to go through these tweets really quickly, in chronological order on the travel ban. This is in the wake of the London attack. We need to be smart. This is Saturday, 6:17 p.m. Vigilant and tough. We need the courts to give us back our rights. We need the travel ban as an extra level of safety. Then in the morning, 5:25. People, the lawyers, and the courts can call it whatever they want, but I'm calling it what we need and what it is, a travel ban, exclamation point. The Justice Department should have stayed with the original travel ban, not the watered-down, politically correct version they submitted to SC, Supreme Court. The Justice Department should ask for an expedited hearing of the watered-down travel ban before the Supreme Court and seek a much tougher version. In any event, we are extreme vetting people coming into the U.S. in order to help keep our country safe. The courts are slow and political. In reaction to this, George Conway, who's the husband of Kellyanne Conway, said, quote, "These tweets may make some people feel better, but they certainly won't help OSG get 5 votes in SCOTUS, which is what actually matters. Sad." That is the Solicitor General's office making the case to the Supreme Court. Jennifer.
Right. The same morning you had Kellyanne Conway on NBC talking about how the press obsesses over everything that the president says on Twitter. You've got her husband saying, listen, this gives ammunition to the other side, to critics, to make it, more difficult for the, Solicitor General to make their case. But listen, I think the interesting conclusion from today was you can add Donald Trump to the list of people who are frustrated with the actions of Donald Trump and his administration. You've got Trump saying that he didn't like this watered-down travel ban that he watered down himself. You've got him talking about how frustrated he is that he doesn't have, it's taking forever to get ambassadors. You had him considering using executive privilege to try to keep his former FBI director from testifying. That's a little bit difficult when you fired someone because executive privilege is easier to use to keep someone, a government official, from releasing information. And then you've got Trump expressing frustration with what members of his own administration are saying on behalf. So he went to Twitter today to speak for himself.
Molly.
Well, I do agree that the most problematic tweet was actually the one where he says the Justice Department shouldn't have issued this watered-down travel ban. Well, he's the person who signed that. If he had a problem with it, he didn't have to sign that. And there are many areas where the bureaucracy and the administrative state are kind of unaccountable to any source of authority. This is not one of them. This is something where he could have had control over the situation. At the same time, I think there's a little bit too much reaction going on here. I mean, he's been calling it a travel ban for a really long time. People act like it just happened again now. He did it after Sean Spicer said it wasn't a travel ban in January. He did it a few days after that. And also, there is a larger issue here, which is a bigger discussion about whether countries have the right to have conversations about immigration and who's allowed in a country and not, and if they're not allowed to have that. In the context of what's happening in London, this is something that is actually to Donald Trump's advantage, that he is willing to talk about immigration. He's willing to talk about how immigration affects national security and economic policy, and other people aren't. So it's not entirely as out there as people are making it out.
Yeah, and even some of these Muslim or Arab countries, Tom, when I was traveling overseas, they were sympathetic to that whole who can come in and who can't. Saudi Arabia has its own issue along its southern border, and so there's the substance of that. This is a process question about whether tweets speak to a White House policy or it's the president on social media. And I think that line, when they start to try to draw that distinction between that the tweets somehow are less important, it doesn't make any sense. It
muddies the waters inherently. It hurts the president the most. And ultimately, I think when this does go to the Supreme Court, I do think the president will be successful. But as Molly points out, the idea of the politics, the substance of the executive to be able to protect the American people, firmly, I think President Trump does hold the cards there, because if you look, for example, what happened in London, and you look at the threat reporting of European passport holders trying to use visa waiver to travel to the United States, behind the scenes, which he's getting briefed on, of course, there's a lot of issues.
The one tweet among all of these that I think is the most astonishing and has gotten the least amount of coverage is the one where he says we're already doing extreme vetting. Well, the point of the travel ban was to give 90 days during which the administration could redo the vetting procedure and come up with extreme vetting. If, as the president has tweeted today, we already are doing that, then the ban disappears, the rationale evaporates, and what is it all about? It's moot. This undermines the case the administration has before the Supreme Court. more than anything else, and it's sitting out there in broad daylight. And by the way, if you watch the hearings, you must watch it on Fox. It could be a bust, but boy, it's going to be exciting.